The Nikon D750 was released back in September 2014 and it only just went off sale at the beginning of this year. That's like 5 years on the market and, well, 6 years old as a design. And even though this was pretty highly regarded back when it was launched, is it now a dinosaur? That's pretty prehistoric in terms of digital cameras, or is it still a good camera? Is this the bargain full-frame DSLR of 2020? Let's find out. Well, first of all, let's throw some specs and some context at you so you know where this thing sat in the market back when it was launched. It was kind of a prosumer kind of thing. It was high-end amateur, entry-level professional kind of camera. To that end, it's very well built. Now, it's built to professional standards even though it's tiny. It's 840 grams, but uses a Kevlar carbon chassis with magnesium alloy components in the top and the bottom of the thing, so it's pretty tough. It'll take a beating and you can use it in pretty much any weather, and I have to say this one has been used in any weather and it's looking pretty good for it despite that. Inside it uses the XSpeed 4 processing engine taken from the Nikon D4, which was the top of the line pro camera from Nikon back at the time. And the shutter box is good for 150,000 releases. Now, there was a recall on these about 2 years ago for a dodgy shutter box, so a lot of cameras, including this one, will have a new shutter in them. Important to note, this is a DSLR, so it's a mirrored body, not a newfangled mirrorless. This uses a 35.9 by 24mm CMOS sensor with 24.3 megapixels. That means full frame. That means if you use any of Nikon's legacy archive of f-mount lenses going back to the 50s, it will work on here in its native format, which is a good thing. Now, there was a bit of an arms race going on about 5 years ago of bigger and bigger file sizes, but to be honest, you don't need that kind of 40 or 50 megabyte file size. This is 24.3 megapixels. I use this alongside a D5, which is actually a smaller file size, and apart from the fact that you can't tell the difference between which camera took which file, if you take the same photo on the same lens under the same lighting conditions at the same time, pixel peeping, you struggle to tell which camera did what. This borrows heavily from its bigger brother, the D810, which is a 40 plus megapixel body, which is great for landscapes and billboard photography, but to be honest, in the real world, that's just overkill. You don't need that much file size. It makes your computer struggle, it makes storage an issue if you're shooting RAW, which you should be shooting RAW, and if you're not, why not? So yeah, 24 megapixels is more than adequate. This gives a 70 megabyte file when you open it in Photoshop, and that means it's good for crops. If you need to crop in tight, it's good for big blow-ups. If you're doing a giant poster somewhere, it's good enough. And this camera and the D5 have given plenty of magazine front covers and double page spreads with absolutely impeccable quality. You can't really fault in any way at all. Now, in case you're not familiar with Nikon's naming strategy of FX and DX, FX means full frame. That's the whole 35mm equivalent size sensor, and DX, which is a slightly cropped frame for using smaller, cheaper bodies and lighter lenses and cheaply made lenses. Now, in full frame, that gives you 6016 by 4016 pixel files, and in DX mode, 3936 by 2624 pixels, which is about 2/3. And coincidentally, the DX sensor is 2/3 to an FX sensor. In case you're wondering why you should be buying a full frame camera in the first place, well, the main reason will be image quality. Really, it comes down to quality, because if you've got the same number of megapixels over a smaller area, they're bunched up tighter, they can't work so effectively, and especially in low light when you need to cluster pixel groups together to get the higher ISOs, they lose definition and accuracy and sharpness. So the larger the sensor, the clearer and crisper the image. That's why medium format equivalent digital cameras are worth so much money and give such incredible results. Having a full frame body gives you the chance to shoot higher quality images. Also, there's a difference in the way the lenses work, because the back of a lens is designed to focus its image onto a particular size sensor at a particular distance from the rear element. You can use DX and FX lenses interchangeably, but there are changes. For example, there's a 1.5 times magnification when you use a FX lens on a DX body. That means your 24mm wide angle becomes a 36mm not quite wide angle. So if you want to use your wides to the fullest extent they can have, then you need to go onto an FX body. The trade-off of that, of course, is that your longest lenses do become 1.5 times longer as well. So if you want to do long-range photography, I don't know, air shows, bird spotting, that kind of thing, peeping Tom, who knows, then it gives you an advantage to go and use a DX body with a long lens. You can also go the other way and use a DX lens on an FX body, but the camera will automatically detect that and then drop into DX mode and use that smaller cropped file size. Fortunately, this is a high enough quality and high enough resolution that won't really be an issue, and you can carry on shooting and using those lenses. Now, this camera does come with sensor cleaning, which predecessors didn't, and even the D4, which bigger brother didn't as well, which is really annoying when you get a bit of dust on the sensor and it's on every image. You can set that to come on at startup, shutdown, or manually anytime, which is a very handy feature. It shoots in JPEG and RAW. JPEG, I guess, for backup, I suppose, or doing time-lapse, and RAW for literally everything else. In the side of the camera, you have got twin SD slots. This is a good thing. Okay, the old traditional SDs aren't as fast as the new SD Express and those kind of very expensive cards, but they are utterly ubiquitous. They are everywhere. If you run out of storage on a shoot or a holiday, you can buy them in a supermarket, a petrol station, an off license. Any corner shop will sell you an SD card pretty much for not much money, and you can keep on shooting. And there's two of them, and you can set the second card slot either for overflow if you fill the first card, or for backup for security, which is again a good thing. Now, this thing uses Nikon's EL15 battery, which has been around for a while, and it's been a lot of cameras, which means they are cheap. You can buy a few of these and have a few in your bag for not much money. So if you want to go away on holiday, you don't have to worry about that. However, you probably won't run out of power anyway, because this thing is good, according to Nikon, for 1230 frames shooting in RAW, or 55 minutes of video, which is a long time. I have to say, although I've run the battery flat on video a few times, I've never ever run out of power shooting stills. If you want more, you can also have the D16 battery grip and handhold, which makes it quite handy for shooting verticals if you want to do that kind of thing, but easy if you've got larger hands and you struggle to get it in. Although I do quite like the smaller form factor, because it's just about right for being a small camera that's not too small, I find, with my size hands. Obviously, if you've got different size hands, you may think differently. Now, that grip is a bonus because you can put the battery in there, giving you obviously battery life, but also it will take 6 AA batteries. So again, if you're caught out on a shoot and you have got no battery power on your EL16, you can put AA's in there. Again, buy them literally anywhere, keep on shooting. So this is a very useful camera as a backup. Now, noticeably, because this is a DSLR, not a mirrorless, it has got a pentaprism still with a real optical viewfinder. So you are seeing exactly what the camera sees optically. So whatever you set the lens to, you are seeing that. You don't get the image preview in the viewfinder like you do on a mirrorless. So if you change the exposure, you don't see what the camera is seeing. However, if you watch it in live view, which you can do with this button here, you can see what the camera will be seeing. So as you change the shutter speed and the aperture, you will see it getting lighter and darker, which is good unless you're shooting an entirely flashlit image, in which case you see a black screen until the flash goes off, which is less helpful, in which case the traditional viewfinder is a good thing. Now, this viewfinder does have diopter adjustment, which I've just demonstrated to you and just messed up for my own eyes. That was a mistake. And being a camera aimed at kind of the pro market, it does have depth of field preview, which you'll notice cameras that are lower down the market range don't have, and it's a fantastic feature, so you can see exactly what's going to be in focus as you're shooting. On the left hand side of the dial, you've got a number of options. You've got fully auto, program, shutter speed, aperture priority, and manual. I tend to shoot this thing in manual only. It also does have a number of scenes, so low light, sport, that kind of action preset for you, or you can have your own user presets in 2 positions on this main dial on the left. But below that, you've got your shutter release motor drive options. So single shot, continuous shooting low, which is about 3.5 frames a second, continuous shooting high, which is 6.5 frames a second, which is very respectable for a camera in this class with this size of battery. If you go to things like the D5, you're shooting 9, 12, 13 frames a second, which is extreme. But if you're a sports photographer or an action photographer, then you will notice that difference. However, for most people, in 99% of the situations, that's more than fast enough. You also have a quiet function as well, which slows the mirror release and lock up down so it doesn't make such a bang and clatter. So if you're shooting somewhere discreet and quiet, you can be a bit more hush hush, which is nice. And of course, you have a self-timer and multiple exposure if you want to go for that kind of thing, which is always good fun. Talking of shutter releases, this thing will fire up to 1/4000th of a second. So if you want to do some freezing action, that is brilliant. And in addition to these regular motor drive options, you also have a couple hidden in the menus. And the menu system is nice and easy to use. And inside there, you'll find an intervalometer for shooting time lapses, and you can shoot long exposure continuously. So as one long exposure ends, the next one will start automatically. So that's virtually limitless depending on the size of your memory card. So if you want to do things like image stacking or star trails, then this is going to be very helpful for you indeed. Now, one area I do think that DSLRs still have the edge over mirrorless cameras in is focusing. This uses Nikon's advanced multicam 3500-2 AF sensor, which has got phase detection across 51 focus points and 15 cross-type points, which means it works in 2 different ways, some off the focal plane of the sensor, some reflecting up into the pentaprism and working in a different way, which gives it the edge because say Nikon Z cameras, which are mirrorless, only have the off the sensor plane image. So in low light, these are more effective. This will focus down to -3 EV, so basically in pitch darkness it can still find something to focus on, which is a good thing. There's a nice little switch down the side for autofocus to manual should you wish to override it, and a button in the centre of that for changing focus modes. It's got single servo AF, continuous servo AF, predictive tracking and electronic rangefinder. In terms of where you focus it, you can either have wide area, single area. The user can pick one of the 51 points just by using the thumb wheel on the back. Now, something which does grind my gears with this camera, because generally most things are good with this. One thing that's less than great is this screen. Although it's nice and clear on 1.29 million pixels, although it is only half that of a D5 in terms of pixel count, it is nice and crisp, but it's not a touch screen. You'd think it's going to be a touch screen because it's so big, but it isn't. So you have to use the button on the back if you want to be scrolling through, and also when you're choosing your focus points. This is also a tilt screen, which when I first used it a few years ago, I thought, that's a gimmick, that'll never catch on. What did I know? I was the guy who didn't sign the Beatles on this one. This one folds out to 90, or beyond 90 degrees above and down to 90 degrees below, which is great for shooting high shots and of course low shots, but it doesn't go out sideways, which would be great. So then you could use it as a blog camera far more easily. Sadly, it doesn't do that. Now, in terms of other professional level features, it's got exposure compensation, plus and minus 5 stops either way, exposure bracketing up to 9 frames, and exposure lock or autofocus lock on this button on the back, so you can choose where in the frame you can take your metering or focus from. It's got center weighted, spot and evaluative, although using some older lenses it will only use center weighted or spot rather than evaluative, because the older than D series lenses it needs the CPU in the lens to assist it. Speaking of old lenses, this is one of the great things about using a Nikon F camera or a Z camera with the adapter. Nikon have been building lenses using the same F mount for 60 years now, 61 years. That's a lot of lenses, and not only Nikon's ones, there are some fantastic third-party lenses from lots of different manufacturers from all around the world. So the world is literally your lobster when it comes to picking a lens for a Nikon D750. Anything from nice tried and trusted D series 1.4 50mm, which is a beautiful bit of glass and can be yours for like under £100, for like 70 or 80 quid for one of these things, and that's a crisp bit of glass. PC lenses for tilt shift, super long telephotos, wide angles, you name it, dirt cheap primes. There's a lot out there that makes this thing very appealing in terms of glass. Also, I always forget this function exists on this camera because I never use it. It has actually got a pop-up flash. It's only a guide number of 12, but it's there, so if you're stuck, it will work. Or if you're using off-camera flash triggered by a slave, it'll do it. Handy, huh? In terms of flash functionality, it's got plenty of flash features as well. You can have exposure compensation on your flash to power it up and down. You can have second curtain, first curtain, any sync you want really, so you can have light trails, not light trails, you name it. It's all in there. Everything is in here, which is great. And it'll work with Nikon's creative lighting system if you're using a series of speed lights. Now, going back to bloggers, if you do want to shoot video on this thing, it's a very capable machine. It's not 4K, let's get out there first of all, but it is HD. It shoots 1920 by 1080 full HD at 60, 50, 30, 25 and 24 frames per second. Oh, do you know how many times I've had to say that to get that right? It records in MP4 or H.264 codecs and has microphone and headphone ports in the side, instead of the traditional 9-pin Nikon round plug on the front. It also has HDMI, USB and an AS15 sync terminal, so you can plug like remote releases and that kind of thing into it, but you don't necessarily need to. And this is actually the reason I bought this camera 3 years ago, is because of the Nikon app. This camera can actually be controlled from your mobile, and I bought it for a specific purpose, for a specific job where I had to put a camera in a car factory welding cage with the welding robots working around it, and obviously I couldn't be there to do that, and I couldn't have a cable release because the doors wouldn't shut, and I had to have a remote link to the thing. And guess what? The Wi-Fi node that this camera creates was strong enough to come through the shielded cage, and I could trigger the camera off my mobile phone and get the shot. And it was a fantastic picture, which was then used by that car manufacturer in their publicity, and I'm very proud of that picture. I'm not sure if I can show it or not. I'll have to ask someone nicely. If I can, it's going to come up right now. That functionality gives you the choice of where in the frame it will pick the focus point from and then hit the button to fire. Now, one of the amazing beauties of Nikon cameras is the fact that if you've used a Nikon camera previously, you can pick up any other Nikon camera and virtually everything is in the same place. So obviously your shutter button isn't on the front like any other camera, but it kind of falls naturally in the same position as all the other Nikons. The on-off switch is surrounding next to it. A new Nikon standard is the record button for video is just behind that. And then you've got your control buttons for focus and moving through the menus just here. Everything is in the same place. And normally, and this is one fail point with this camera, is that normally on a Nikon, the ISO button is just directly behind the shutter button. So if you're shooting, you can change the ISO without taking your eye off the viewfinder. On this one, it's down here on the back on one of the side menu buttons, and so it's quite annoying. And it's actually easy to hit the file quality button instead and change from RAW to like low quality JPEG if you're not paying full attention. So you have to be really quite wary of that. And that's my three real bugbears with this camera. The position or lack of that button, the lack of a touch screen, and the fact that screen doesn't fold out. Every other respect, I do think it's an amazing camera. Now, why do I say this is the bargain of 2020 in full frame cameras? Well, it is. It's an utter bargain. At launch, this was around £1,800, so it was pushing into the low end of professional camera territory. But now it's off production. Looking on Wex and MPB Photographic this week, they were ranging from £530 to £800, which is virtually nothing. The nearest rival in terms of quality would be the Canon 6D Mark II, which is also a 26 megapixel sensor, so only just a little bit larger than this, so negligible really. And the cheapest I could see one of those was £1,000, so potentially double the price of the cheapest one of these. So yeah, this is phenomenal good value. Other cameras I might take a look at if I was thinking of a D750 for the same kind of price, maybe going backwards to a D800, its predecessor, which gives you a bigger file size because that's 40 something, 46 or 44 megapixels. I forget, it's a while since I've handled one of those. And if you stick on the 1.4 50mm G lens, wow, that is the sharpest camera I've ever seen. You can literally cut your eyeballs on a frame from a D800 with that lens. However, it's older technology, it's an older, slower processor, so it's slower burst rates, slower processing. You don't have the Wi-Fi option, which is why I actually bought this camera over a D800 at the time. It's tough, it's easy to use, it's got 1,000 lenses. Literally any Nikon F lens will go onto it, any Nikon Speedlight will go onto it. There are dozens of manufacturers churning out things to go on this. Is this the ultimate bargain of 2020? Under £800 for a full frame camera with this level of quality? Yes, yes it is. My advice for you in 2020, if you're looking at getting into full frame photography, whether you're a Nikon user or not, buy a D750. You won't be disappointed.